Hey you all, welcome to the Dixiecryptid podcast. I appreciate you clicking on the video. Real quick before we get started, Yeti Bars is running a great sale in observance of Memorial Day. The sale is going on until the end of the day this Tuesday. I don't know what that date is, but it's the Tuesday after Memorial Day 2021. If you use the code MD21 at checkout, you can get a 15% discount on your whole order. Go to their website, yetibars.net. Check out the Yeti Chest Bar. Check out the Dixiecryptid Bar, the Yeti Hippie #1, the Dude, the Shroot Bar, the Yeti Desert Bar. What is that about? Yeti Per Smoothness, GM, Yeti Espresso, all kinds of soaps available, and they have everything in stock. All it takes is yetibars.net in your address bar, or look them up on Facebook at Yeti Bars. Take a look at them. Use that discount code and get your 15% off and stock up on all your favorite soaps. All right, let's move into the video. I've got two stories. I think you guys are going to enjoy this. All right, here we go. All right. If y'all hear a little rumble going on during this podcast, that's my wife out running the lawnmower in our yard. She's a peach. She said she wanted to cut grass, so I said, you go for it, girl. Here is an email written by a woman who doesn't want to reveal her name, but here's what she writes, and this is so good. She writes, I'm 83 years old and I listen to your podcast with my daughter. Doing so has triggered a memory of a story my father used to tell. What he encountered was a mystery to him, but he never forgot it. In 1933, he was 20 years old and living on an exceptionally large farm between Lenoir and Blowing Rock in the foothills of North Carolina with his mother and father. He was the oldest of 8 children. My mother, who was 19 at the time and the youngest of 10 children, lived 10 miles away on the next farm over with her mother. My mother's father had died just before she was born. So to make ends meet, my grandmother had turned their big home into a boarding house. At the time, my parents were courting and making wedding plans. On the hot summer night in question, my father had stayed later than he usually did. He had lost track of time as they planned out their future nuptials. In those days, there was no electricity in that area, and the roads were all dirt. Anyone who has been in the mountains at night knows there's nothing quite as dark as the darkness that falls on the mountains. My father had a long walk home, and for navigation, he only had the stars that he could see between the branches of the trees that lined the road and formed the canopy overhead. At 6'2", my father was a big man who was not afraid of anything. Like most men of that era, he was used to hunting and spending time in the woods. He'd made it to within about a half a mile from home when he began to hear something following him. It came up alongside him and he could clearly tell it was something on 2 feet. It was too dark to see what it was, but he said he would take a step and it would take a step. He would walk and it would walk, and when he stopped, it would stop. My father said he knew it could not be a panther or a bear because they both walk on all fours. He was just as sure it wasn't a man, and he kept thinking, what is this? He didn't have a gun on him, so he felt a bit helpless, and he dared not run, not knowing what it was. He only knew it was very big. He kept walking, and this thing kept pace with him the whole way, just a few feet away. He was unnerved, but did not want to show the fear that he felt. Up ahead, he could see the lights of his family's home in the distance. There was a fenced-in pasture in front of the house that he normally would have avoided. There were a lot of cattle in the pasture, and with them was a big, mean bull. For that reason, he would normally stay on the road and walk around the pasture and across the creek. This night, as soon as my father reached the fence, the thing let out a blood-curdling scream, and that was enough to make him run. He jumped the fence and crossed the pasture with lightning speed, not stopping until he reached the front porch. As he ran, he thought, where are my coonhounds? Where are my hunting dogs? They usually ran out to greet him, and they weren't afraid of anything, but on this night they were nowhere to be found. This scared him even more. He knew whatever this thing was, it must be bad to keep the dogs from coming out. He was finally getting close to the porch, but he couldn't see the first step because it was so dark. Well, he took a guess and took them two at a time until he was at last standing on the wide veranda. That's when he heard the dogs. They were up under the house whimpering. He looked back and he couldn't see anything, but he knew it was still there. He quickly stepped inside as if nothing had happened. He didn't want to frighten his family, nor did he ever tell them about it. Through the years, though, he would occasionally tell us the story. He didn't know anything about Bigfoot, but I was warned as a child not to go into the woods at night because there were boogers out there. He said he never again stayed too late while courting my mother. He always made sure he left well before it got dark. We have often wondered what it could have been that my father encountered. After listening to the stories of other people's accounts on your channel, I really do believe it was a Bigfoot that walked along the road with him that dark summer night in 1933. My father's father had his own tale to tell. It's shorter and a bit funny. He also never said anything about believing in Bigfoot, but he did believe in woolly boogers. My grandfather's story took place in 1912 in the Mortimer area of North Carolina. It was another dark night and another dark road. As with my father, he was looking up through the overhead branches at the night sky for guidance. I guess that's just what they did back in those days. My grandfather described the night as so dark he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. That fact, combined with the fact that he was looking up, is probably why he didn't see it. And out of nowhere, he stumbled over something. He was unable to regain his balance and he fell, landing right on top of something large and furry. It was a huge animal that was lying in the road. Too dazed and shocked to move, he just sat there until the creature swatted him away like a pesky fly. Then, to his amazement, it got up and walked off, like a man. When telling the story, he would always assure us that it was not a bear, and he didn't know what it was. And he would finish the story each time with this quote, "But it was huge, let me tell you." And that's the end of her email, and I thought, that is so great. Again, y'all heard me say it 1,000 times. I love these secondhand stories. And this woman is, she's 83 years old and she's remembering these things. And for all these years, she's heard these stories. And after hearing other people's stories, she is now pretty sure that these two men, two relatives of hers, encountered a Bigfoot in 1912 and in 1933. Her grandfather and her father. Oh, that's just fascinating. Thank you, ma'am, for sending the story. It was wonderful. We really appreciate it. This email's from Paul. This is really good. He writes, in 1979, I went backpacking with my girlfriend, my two children, my brother, and his two children. The children were all between 8 and 12 years old. We hiked into Oregon's Three Sisters Wilderness area, heading for the Mink Lake Basin. We were 2/3 of the way to the main lake, walking down the mountain ridge pathway when I spotted movement to my left 100 feet away. It could have been a bear, but it looked more like a Bigfoot to me. It was 9 to 10 feet tall, and it stood there watching us for the longest time. I tried to push the thought of Bigfoot out of my head to keep fear from taking over and turning into panic, but it was difficult to imagine a bear standing and watching us for so long without going down on all fours at some point. Fortunately, by the time we got to Mink Lake, I had buried my fears and was ready to have a good time. So we found a nice camp spot at the end of the peninsula near the lake, and for the next 3 days we all had the time of our lives. On the third night, we were all sitting around the campfire roasting wieners and marshmallows when, at 10:30, we heard something that sounded bipedal walking past our campsite. It was like the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk. I bet it weighed 800 pounds. We could hear it pass by us, walk down the trail a good distance, turn around, and then walk back past our camp. Not only could we hear it, but we could also see it moving in the trees. It was too dark to make out any detail, but we could make out its form, and it was enormous. The children started getting scared, so my brother suggested that we all go to bed. We climbed into our tents, somehow finding security and being inside. My brother, however, elected to stay outside. He's never been afraid of anything, and he wanted to sleep alone out under the stars. Well, that worried me a little bit, but what could I say? Somehow, we managed to fall asleep, and the next morning we awoke to the sound of hundreds of pigeons in the trees overhead. We'd never seen a sight like it before. We spent the morning being entertained by them and feeding them. It was a nice diversion that took our minds off the previous night. Eventually, our interest in the birds waned and we headed down to play in the water. The whole day was great. Later, my brother came over to me and said, "Why don't we pack up and hike out this evening and find another place to camp for tomorrow?" I agreed, but I couldn't help but wonder if he had seen or experienced something that he wasn't sharing with me. We all packed our bags and started walking across the mountain ridge towards our car. In my haste to get everything packed, I had put all the flashlights in the bottoms of the backpacks. Now the sun was setting and we still had 13 miles to go. To help us move faster, my brother decided to take one of the children's packs and hike out, and then come back for another. He'd be able to move faster carrying 2 packs than any of the kids could carry one, and without a pack, that child would be able to move faster, and we'd all get back to the car sooner. With just me, my girlfriend, and the 4 kids, we continued on our way. We were 2.5 miles from the car when we started hearing noises on the trail behind us. We were heading towards the mountain switchbacks. Whatever was following us was only 50 feet back. The footfalls and the heavy breathing left no doubt in my mind a Bigfoot was tracking us. What was I going to do with my girlfriend and 4 children hiking through the woods alone in complete darkness? We were all so scared that we didn't want to stop and unload the backpacks to find our flashlights. With every step, the fear increased to the point that it was almost tangible. Our hearts were racing and anxiety was setting in. I had to do something or we would all be lost. I was afraid that this giant being, this Bigfoot, might grab one of the children and dash off into the night and we'd never see them again. I put my daughter in front of me and one of the boys behind me. Then my girlfriend with the other 2 boys in front of her, and we continued down the trail. And every now and then we switched the kids around, much to their dislike, and we kept going. The whole thing was very intense. To help alleviate the children's fear and keep moving, we started singing the Snow White song, "Hi Ho, Hi Ho." That beast was right behind us the whole way. Thump, thump, thump. What was I doing? I must have been out of my mind. We got to the start of the first switchback and were headed for the second when we heard the creature run down the side of the mountain to wait on the trail ahead of us. Our hearts were pounding in our ears and we were visibly shaking as we passed by where we could see its form outlined in the darkness. We passed it safely and began our way down the next switchback. Just like before, it fell in right behind us. Minutes later, it ran down the mountain again to wait for us at the next switchback. We had to pass it again. It was terrifying seeing this massive black object in the night standing just up the bank from us, watching us as we marched along singing. There were a lot more switchbacks ahead, and that thing followed us in this manner for 2.5 miles until my brother finally showed up to take another backpack. By then, the children were scared out of their minds and exhausted. We finally made it to the car. We loaded up the children in the backpacks as quickly as we could. I had just finished telling my brother what had followed us when we heard it again. It was standing behind a fir tree on the edge of the trail near the clearing. It was watching us at the car. Again, my brother is brave and he's never afraid of anything, and he said, "Follow me. We're going to find out what the heck this thing really is." My brother picked up 2 rocks that filled his hands. He told me to grab some too, and I picked up 2 big ones, and we stood there listening for a minute. We could hear it over behind the fir tree, and my brother threw a rock at it, and it let out a groan. Then he threw another one, and it groaned again. And then he threw another, and another, and another. And finally we ran out of rocks, and I said, "What are we going to do now?" He looked at me and he yelled, "Run!" We both took off. We ran over and jumped in the car as fast as we could. Seconds later, our tires were throwing dirt and gravel as we fishtailed for a good 100 feet. In my rearview mirror, I saw the outline of the creature stepping out into the parking lot. We never went back to that place again. That Bigfoot or Sasquatch could have killed any of us at any time. Instead, it just followed us out of the woods to safety. I wonder if that was its real purpose all along. Was it protecting us as we traveled in the dark? Was there something out there that would have hurt us if it hadn't been there? Now I'm sorry that we threw rocks, but at the time it made perfect sense. And that's the end of his email, and that's the only thing I can say about this story is, number one, it is spectacular. I mean, I've never heard one like this thing running down the mountain and catching them at every switchback. But the thing about the flashlights, man, stop and dig a couple out. I mean, I don't think you're keeping ahead of this thing by walking fast. Stop and get a flashlight out. I kept wanting to say, stop and get a flashlight. But that's kind of like what I do with movies. Don't open the door. Don't look behind that curtain. Don't go in that room. Stop and get a flashlight. You guys know how it goes. But this was a great story, Paul, and I really appreciate you sending it. I know we all enjoyed it. Thank you, sir. All right. Another podcast in the can. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did like it, share it with your friends. Tell your family about it. Share it on social media. I would appreciate that. And other than that, I guess we'll see you guys on the next podcast. I really appreciate you. We'll see you next time. Thank you.